The words that will comfort me, I am. The words that inspire me, I am.
Hello, and welcome to That Oneness Guy podcast, a podcast covering the many aspects and elements that embody oneness, our inherent eternal truth and birthright, reminding us that we are connected to one and all as individualized expressions of one source. I am your host, Danny Rongo, and yes, I am that oneness guy. As an author, speaker, and singer-songwriter, I continue to share my unique message of oneness. So, let's get right into podcasting.
To words that encourage me, I am.
Hello, my friends in oneness, and thank you again for tuning in. Here's the summertime, and hoping that wherever you may be listening to or watching this episode, you're not experiencing the ridiculous heat wave that I am here on the East Coast of these United States. With that said, let's get right into podcasting. I'm really excited about this episode for many reasons. First of all, guys, this is my 50th episode, and it's because of you that I've been doing this now for just about 5 years. And I thank you all for continuing to tune in and to learn about and share oneness. And also, for this very special episode, I am so excited to have the featured guest that I do. Let me tell you, she brings an abundance of spiritual insight and experience to share with us all. And she does so in such a vivacious and straightforward manner. But as I told her during our first conversation last week, it's that fact that draws me to her. I simply love that, like me, my guest speaks honestly, directly, and calls it like it is without any reservation. So let me tell you a little about Renee McKenna. Renee is a master soul mentor, hypnotherapist, shamanic healer, podcaster, and an author of the book and audio series, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing. Through humor, irreverence, authenticity, and no-nonsense Boston style permeate Renee's work and offerings. She leads workshops, groups, and individual mentorship in emotional healing, spirituality, and personal growth. And she's been doing this, my friend, since 1988. Through her moniker and podcast of the same name, Spiritual Psi-Kology, which you'll see here is spelled differently, she brings her 30 plus years of experience sharing snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth, and introduces us to her unique blend of shamanism and Buddhist philosophy with hypnotherapy and body-based mindfulness as she guides people to heal and transform on a soul level. She has a master's degree in transpersonal psychology and is a certified clinical hypnotherapist. For 14 years, she has studied depth hypnosis, shamanism, and energy work with Dr. Isa Gucciardi. Hope I said that right. And has been a student of lifespan integration, Hakomi method. I hope I said that right as well. And Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and healing methods. So, hey, listen, my friends, please say hello to my new friend in oneness, Renee McKenna. Hello, Renee.
Hey, Danny. Thanks so much for having me today.
Oh, listen, like I said, it's honestly my pleasure. Since I've been following all of your work, Renee, like I mentioned too up top there, I just love the fact that you speak right from the hip, as they say, and you don't hold anything back. Because I don't know about your ethnicity, but I am Italian, and that is just how I speak, and it comes out naturally. And if I got to drop an F-bomb, I do so accordingly and with, all heartfelt emotion behind it, as I kind of get the feeling that you do as well too. Because like I've seen some of your graphic drawings that you have up there, which are great, and I love them. But again, it means a lot for me, to the show, to that oneness guy, to have you on here. So thank you. But I always like to say up front, tell our listeners here anything that you would like to about, what led you to where we are right now, to your spirituality, to your practice, and any aspect of your background that you would like to share with us.
So, I came to do the work that I do because of my own suffering, really. And life is hard, and I found it particularly difficult for much of my life, and have tried many ways to struggle through just being basically functional, like having a relationship and holding a job and being in the complexity of modern life. And it all felt really overwhelming for me, particularly early in my life. And so I discovered drugs and alcohol very young. And I really needed to medicate myself to be able to handle the level of anxiety and angst and manage my depression. And, I was just kind of a wreck. I felt like everybody else got some instruction manual of how to live, and I missed that day.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. And I had to pretend like I knew what I was doing, and I thought everybody else knew too. Of course, now I know nobody else knows either.
No,
but
yeah, absolutely.
But I thought everybody else did, because we all try to pretend. So, it was really through my own dysfunction that I came to be forced to become functional in a different way, a way I didn't expect.
Yeah.
And I've had,
Was it one event, Renee, or was it like a culmination of months, weeks, years, maybe, or, what did you find that it was?
So for me, there's been a whole series of events, and now I really consider life to be a series of events. And if we pay attention to those events, then there's always a conversation happening with God or the life force or the universe or whatever you want to call it, goddess, your own higher self. And I didn't know how to participate in that conversation. I really, the big event for me was a series of events happened that I ended up deciding to get clean and sober from drugs and alcohol, which completely redirected my life. And it was kind of, although it didn't seem very dramatic in the moment, because it was just a person who I didn't know coming up to me and saying, hey, I think you're fucked up and you need some help. And I was like, really? And, I understand that today as what I would call grace, which is available to all of us, right?
Yep.
And so, that it really completely redirected my life onto a spiritual path, which had never been anything that I was interested in, really. I wasn't raised religious. I thought religion and spirituality were the same thing. And I didn't disbelieve that there was a force for good in the universe. I just didn't think it wanted to have anything to do with me.
Really?
And I thought that I wasn't good enough for that. Like, that was for other people, and people like me, well, we just fell through the cracks. And so once I started to participate in that conversation with the universe in a more direct way, through, being willing to experiment with prayer and meditation and different forms of looking deeper inside myself, as opposed to always trying to fix the outside. I was always looking for lose the right amount of weight, find the right guy, get the right job. If I could just arrange my outside life, then maybe I wouldn't feel such a wreck inside. And what I have come to experience is that when I change the inside, then the outside will change. Yeah.
Ain't that lovely how that just happens, right?
Yeah. And so that the outside really is a manifestation of the inside. So,
absolutely.
My married boyfriend and all my debt and all my craziness was that was actually not, I wasn't a victim of circumstance. that actually those were the results of 1,000 million little choices that I made on a regular basis, that I wasn't taking responsibility for, that I wasn't conscious about. I was just bumbling along, making whatever felt like the right decision for the next thing, usually just how to feel better right now in the short run. And I didn't know how to think about things in the long run. I didn't know how to, I really didn't know how to work for anything, to tell you the truth. I kind of just wanted instant gratification, and fuck it, I'll deal with the consequences later, right? And the consequences started to build up. And so there's been a whole flip for me of working on the inside first and then the outside, and it does fall into place, even if it doesn't seem like it, you know. And it's not like I'm not eligible for difficulties. I know you're having difficulties, and you know, we do, like, and at many times in my life I thought, oh, so my expectation is for everything to go easy and smooth, and if it doesn't, I'm either mad or I feel victimized by it. Because I'm special, right? Everybody, aren't we all special? Like we should get, I shouldn't get parking tickets. I shouldn't get
nothing. Shouldn't get a cracked windshield like I just found out that I have yesterday.
Right. Like, oh, what's that about? That's some cosmic, you know, lightning bolt being thrown at me, like some bad thing, you know, and that can happen well into spiritual practice too, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, for me, it's about how to navigate the challenges of this plane of reality that we call Earth. And, you know, I love, over time, I've gathered, you know, tremendous information and wisdom from, I don't know if I have the wisdom, but I've gathered it, and there's so much available to us now. And, you know, like one of my favorite teachers, Eckhart Tolle, who wrote the book, The Power of Now, talks about, he says, you know, we could have a circumstance and we can make it into a problem, but it's actually just a situation. And so do we want to make it a problem, or can we be with the situation? And that in itself is a tremendous challenge, right? To take, how do we be present and just do the next right thing, whatever that might be. Not, you know, like in the old way for me, that it was, well, there's a difference. I mean, what's the difference? Here's a question, Danny. What's the difference between the next right thing and repeating old dysfunctional ways of being? It's a good question. What do you think about that?
It's perfect. It's all our perception, how we deem it. Like, you know, who are we to say what's the next right thing is what first comes to mind, right? You know, why are we judging something to begin with as right and wrong, good and bad? That, to me, you know, in my findings, Renee, has always been, you know, like our biggest boundary of separation, for the fact that we do just judge overboard. We just, everything is a judgment. Something is good and something is bad. You're speaking of Eckhart. You know, my specific guru, like I mentioned when we spoke last week, was Dr. Wayne Dyer, and he still is, even though he's transitioned. But he put something to me, Renee, decades ago that just will always be like at the foundation of my spirituality. And he goes, like, there is no right and wrong. Life just is. You know, so like if we can wrap our head around that, that's what helps us to move away from judgmental thoughts and helps to like ease out of separation to the oneness that I know that we are. But it takes time for like people to understand that. So I totally hear what you're saying regarding your story, and how it's typically something in that fashion, some event, some either life-altering event, or just a progression of how people have changed and how they've viewed what they're going through on a daily basis throughout their life. And if they're open enough, right, to, you know, look within, like you said, because your outer world changed when you started to go within, right? So that's a key as far as I'm concerned. And people need to look at that. But your world, here you are stating that your outer world changed completely when you looked and addressed everything from going within. There is no without, there's only within. Yeah.
So it's an interesting question about the idea of right and wrong, and certainly non-duality and duality are interesting topics these days. But I think for myself, I have to say there are so there's consequences to every action, and there is the golden rule. We kind of get back what we put out. And so I think about myself when I was active in my addiction, and I was a petty criminal, and I had a penchant for married men, and I was a pretty vengeful person. If you messed with me, boy, I'd make it sure that we try to get even. So I've done my share of tire slashing and other not so helpful.
Wow. But I was never on your bad side.
Yeah, I was like, you mess with me, I'll take you down with me. And so like those behaviors, most of which were rooted in fear and anger, and vengefulness, had a lot of shame. Like the behaviors that I did, the choices I made that came out of those, what I would consider low resonance and even destructive. Like I the way that I gathered power in the world was often to try to steal power from other people in one way or another. And
Wow.
And that is so we can be a destructive force in the world, or we can be a constructive force in the world. Now, in the metaverse, in the very long run of evolution, does it come out in the wash? I think it does. I really do. I think we are all headed for oneness.
It plays itself out.
It plays itself out. It may take a couple thousand lifetimes.
Yeah.
I would prefer not to repeat. I'm kind of into like, if it really hurts, that's for me. I think if and there's a difference between authentic pain that creates growth and evolution, and suffering, which is a place where I'm stuck and repeating something that is actually destructive, right, or harmful. So for me, those two, the choice between suffering and joy, the choice between love and fear, like, is it right or wrong? No, but is there better and worse? I think there is, actually.
Yeah.
I really do. I think it makes a difference if I kick the dog or if I feed the dog.
Yeah.
I can do either, and I can say, well, it doesn't matter, but I think it matters to the dog. And it matters to how I feel about myself if I kick the dog or if I feed the dog.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which,
so I don't know. Is that right and wrong?
Yeah. It's all perception, like I said, but I think the key thought, what you touched on was the negativity and the suffering and how we have such a society, Renee, and I'm sure that you sense this too, that likes to wallow in the negative, that tends to wallow and almost like it to the point where it becomes attractive to them. And then what happens? We see so much of a snowball effect on on a micro as well as a macro version of it. We see people, I know personally, so many people who every time I talk to them, it's always like, I got this ass ache now, and this is bothering me, this is bothering me. But every single time when you see that person, it's always a different ass ache. It's always something. And like, I want to stop them and say, do you think that there's a rhyme and a reason to why every time I see you, you have another ass ache? That's all you're doing is you're spinning this. You're not getting out of this lower vibration, right? You just keep spinning this stuff. And I think, like, to my point about that, how it magnifies and becomes the macrocosm of it, that's why we're stuck in such a like a shithole right now.
So,
everything.
I don't think we're stuck.
No.
I don't think we're stuck.
Too.
And I think that
because we got ourselves in it, I believe we can get ourselves out of it.
Well, from my own perspective, this is again, this plane of existence that we get to be on here, this is kind of a consciousness generating and evolving machine. And, you know, if we look at where we're at on an evolutionary scale, actually, things are better for most people in the world than they have ever been. They really are. The standard of living for almost every human on the earth is better than it's ever been. Now, are there people still starving and people in war?
Absolutely.
There are, right? But in general,
Yeah, like you're saying, from the
in
whole.
general, you know, slavery, I don't think is legal anywhere in the world. That's kind of new, right? For millennia, slavery was legal and part of and all different cultures, not just America, right? The Egyptians and China, and indigenous people had slaves. Like, slavery was a way of life. Women had no rights almost to anywhere. They couldn't own property, they couldn't vote, you could kill or beat your wife in most cultures in the world, and there would be no recourse to that, right? And again, even in places like India and parts of Asia where that might still be on the edge, in general, it's not legal anymore, right? So there's an evolution happening of our treatment of each other. There's an awareness that we've never had before of the environment and people's desire to not make things suffer. Now, you know, I really like what Hinduism offers, and the idea that, well, they say like that everything that's happening on the physical world is actually Maya, what they call it, which is kind of illusion. And if we go into deep consciousness and the idea that everything is consciousness, or even in deep physics that everything is energy, there's a lot of evidence for that, right? That there's something illusory about what's actually happening, and everything is, including us, impermanent, which is very confusing, I think, for most of us. But the idea that we actually don't need to change the world, that the dynamics that are happening here, the difficulties that Buddha talked about 3,000 years ago, which is, you know, the suffering of sickness and death and people suffering, which I think generates our own fear, that is the system of this plane of existence, and we are here to be changed by it individually rather than to try to change the system. And I think there's a this is my own personal thing.
Sure.
That there is a wisdom in the system, and I know it in my own life, that that our own dis-ease, whatever that might be, when that becomes acute enough, then we generally become willing to change. Now, some people might, and I do believe in the continuity of the soul across lifetimes. I didn't have an opinion about that until I started to do the work that I do, and just actually I experience it in my clients. Will often end up in past lives when we're doing inner work, or you know, their ancestors will show up. And so there's a lot of access to the dead and access to other planes, even of our own experience on a soul level, that it's just what I observe. I don't really have an attachment to it. But so because of that, I feel like there's a lot more going on here, and there's a tremendous wisdom. And I think that I actually trust what's happening. I don't actually think that this is a shithole. I don't. I mean, is there a lot of suffering here? Yes. And has there always been? Unfortunately, yes. I think over time we might evolve out of it. That's kind of what a lot of the great Eastern traditions tell us, right? Is that we will evolve and grow. And I see it in our own lifetime. We can do it. Now, if we don't pay attention, you know, we don't want to know what's happening, or we're just too ignorant. We might have to keep coming. To get it. And we don't have to evolve. My parents didn't evolve. My parents actually devolved, only a little, but they devolved a little bit before they both died. And I think our job, like with that person that you were talking about, is how can we resonate at the highest level that feels like a stretch for us, right? Like that's I think, so with people that are difficult, I mean, certainly there's people I choose not to spend time with. Although I do now try to hold people as compassionately as I can, and to understand, again, that there's kind of these two major currents. We do live in a plane of duality in a lot of ways, and there's kind of love or fear, and which one is driving me? And at any given day, I can be driven, I can be driven by fear as easily as by love, and that's the choice.
And I'm so glad that you put it in that term, love or fear, because so many people think that the opposite of love would be something like hate, which I always say that it's not, because we are love, so the absence of love would be fear.
Yes. And that can generate hate. Hate is generated by fear.
By fear, yeah.
Yeah, hate is generated by fear. I mean, the idea of lack, like you say, it's an interesting thing. It's like darkness is the absence of light, right? And we do get attached to our own suffering. And I think I really like one of the things that drew me to shamanism is the idea of power, that we're all energy, and we have our own kind of relationship with power, both internally and externally. And, I'm a student of the 12 steps, and in the 12 steps, I'm a student of many traditions. That's one of them. And it talks about a higher power. And the thing that has become obvious to me is that if we are going to access higher power, and this was true for myself, if I'm not accessing higher power, what am I doing? I'm generally accessing lower power. And I like, there's a couple different things. Abraham Hicks has a scale of consciousness. David Hawkins has one. There's a lot of different, where they're looking at these emotional resonances that we have as levels of consciousness. So we could have shame and guilt, or anger, or victimization, or blame, or we could have courage, and we could have hope, and we could have compassion, and we could have love, right, and generosity. And so those are different resonances. And we can look at the great religions. I mean, that's what, Jesus taught about love and forgiveness. And Muhammad in Islam talks about generosity and caring for others. And, Buddhism talks about acceptance and compassion. Like, those are very high resonances. And those religions, I think, continue to inform and propel people forward, because they're calling them to a really high bar, because most of us feed on kind of these lower things, like fear.
Well, that was to my point earlier. Like, why is that still so in today's society with so much negativity around us? Why are we still gravitated towards, that kind of, if you want to call it darkness, as opposed to anything that could be light or higher vibrationally, or something that's, lighter in spirit? But we gravitate towards the dark and that negativity.
Well, not everybody does.
No,
I mean, we can look within us. So really the question, Danny, to answer that question, is we look at that within ourselves, because we all do it, right? We all do it. And I don't know anybody who doesn't feed on some kind of difficulty in their life, even if it's a secret, right? I'm not all cooked, right? I still have my anxiety and my depressions and my worries about this and that, and those are ruminations that I do, thinking about what's going to happen in the future. How could I have done something different in the past?
Sure.
So we all do that, right? Now, I think that the question isn't why do people do that, because people do that because that's where they're at on that consciousness scale, and everybody's in a different place. And there's people, I live in San Francisco, a lot of homeless, mentally ill on the street, right? A lot of
That always broke my heart. I used to travel to San Francisco 4 or 5 times a year when I was working on Wall Street, Renee, and I love San Francisco. It's my second favorite city in the world. But every time I was there, it just seemed like it got worse and worse and worse and worse. The homeless situation, that is.
Well, it's because the weather's really good here and we have great social services. So people come from all over.
People come from all over. Hey, I got a place there.
It doesn't get cold. It doesn't even get very hot, right? So it's a good place to be if you're homeless.
I guess so.
So yeah, if you ask the homeless, a lot of them didn't grow up here. They come here from other places.
But this part of the conversation ties into something that I pulled up from your website, which obviously is correlated directly. You talk about negative energy clearing and spirit release. Can you go into a little more detail about that, especially about, the energy clearing? Because to me, I know that's something that I focus on, Renee. Obviously, we've been talking about it already, about why I feel that so many people gravitate towards the negativity in their life. I know that I've been focusing on still, like in my own journey here, to release more of, negativity, more of my suppressed emotions, especially now as I'm going through this like cancer journey that I referenced to you. It's important for me to just try to get rid of things that aren't serving me. So I'm very intrigued about your input regarding this title here, negative energy clearing and spirit release.
So we all have ways that we move through the world. We have patterned ways, mostly that we protect ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, usually early in our life, those defensive structures probably might have even helped us survive, whatever the culture or family circumstance that we were in.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but they don't, because we don't recognize that we have these operating systems, we're generally outwardly focused. We're generally focused on what's wrong with these people. Why did they do that? What's happening in the outside world, rather than focused on our own self-development. There's no training on it in school. I went to school for psychology. Now I happened to go to a program, and I've done tons and tons of training. I continue to be in training. I'm actually doing a 10-day training in a couple months to deepen and expand my own ability to continue to progress.
Wow, congratulations, though. That's wonderful.
Well, I mean, what we bring to the world, Danny, is the template of our experience, right? And so it's my own resonance is what I'm responsible for. I don't know what anybody else is doing, right?
Yeah.
What anybody else, I can't, there's an old thing about walking in someone else's shoes,
yeah.
10,000 miles. We can't know, but, to be able, so taking responsibility for my own internal states, really being willing to face my own shadow, my own darkness. We all have it. It's much easier to see it in other people. It's easy to look out into the world and say, why do all these people, why are we in this shithole? Why is all this happening? And really, when we look at ourselves, that is where the change happens. And all the great traditions will tell you that. If you want to change the world, the best thing you can do is change yourself first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I resonate more higher up that scale? What am I attached to? So in any kind of clearing, whether it's individual clearing of my own fear, of my own anger and resentment, of my own unresolved suffering and unresolved emotional issues, which everybody's got, right? And ways that I've denied myself, way that I blame myself or shame myself or judge myself. Whatever I'm doing with other people, I'm doing with myself.
Wow.
It's very easy to see, and so when I can take responsibility for that and be with it and see the juice I get out of it, because there's juice in everything that we do. Even if it's destructive, it's generally a way to try to keep myself safe or move myself forward. So like one of the big pieces of work that I like to do, negative energy clearing, is to work with the inner critic, the inner judge, right? Most people have a judge in their head. Tells them, there's a big range. You can tell them from like, you're fat, you shouldn't eat that, or you're ugly, or you better get your wrinkles fixed, or Well, don't do that. Those people, keep your mouth shut, stay small, don't take the risk, all the way to, you're a terrible person and you should hurt yourself, or you are a lowly, awful, destructive human being and you should kill yourself. Like the range of inner
Wow.
critic,
Yeah. That's a big range. Yeah.
it's a big range, right? From a
Yeah.
mild annoyance to suicidal.
The suicidal,
ideation, right?
God forbid. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. No, most people that kill themselves, that's what's happening, is they got this thing in their head that tells them they're no good. And it's actually, if we trace it back, it's actually a dysfunctional way they're trying to keep themselves safe. As crazy as that might be, right?
Wow.
And so it's rooted in fear and not being willing or able to go with the life flow. So when we look deeply at our inner negativity, nothing can live in our conscious space without our permission. That's my experience. I'm going to tell you, Danny, I don't believe there's any victims in the world. That's a very controversial thing to say. On a personality level, absolutely. No one wants to be raped. No one wants to be in war. No one wants to be suffering or starving to death. But on a soul level, I think whatever the circumstances of our life is, and our soul doesn't care about our personality. I think on a soul level, we sign up for what we get in this life.
Yeah.
And it is our personal work to do. And I think that we repeat those patterns, just like people repeat abusive relationships in their life.
Yeah.
I know for myself, I had a lot of repetitive patterns until I was willing to take responsibility for them and to be able to ask God for help, or whatever it is for help, and open up to the love and the courage that's available, not from within me, but to be able to participate in higher resonances that's possible. And so, I mean, that's a really controversial statement, but I kind of stand by it.
Hey.
And the negativity that we have, we can absolutely release if we're willing to take responsibility and willing to get help. I mean, I have a lot of practices. I use a lot of ancient Buddhist Tibetan practices, which are generally about, rather than asking the question why is never a helpful question.
Yeah.
What is actually happening? What is the suffering? Like your friend who's complaining.
I think you say it right here, to be honest with you, Renee, just to interrupt for a second. You say nothing lives in our psychic space without our permission on some level. I've always agreed with that 1,000%. I've always said, suffering isn't holding you. You're holding suffering, because there's so many people who look at it, I'm just suffering. I'm suffering. But like, to your point here, nothing lives in our psychic space without our permission on some level. And makes perfect sense to me.
But becoming willing and able to actually get conscious about it.
That's the key, right?
That's the key. And we often need a lot of help to be able to do that. And really, ultimately, it's about holding ourselves and others with love and compassion.
So do you have patients, Renee, who actually like buck up against, like if you get a patient to that level where they're finally starting to acknowledge and recognize what you're talking about, do they still try to fight you on it and say, no, you might be wrong, or is it typically an easy flow?
I'll tell you right now, if you come to me, we're going to look at it. And if you don't want to take responsibility for it, then people don't come back. If they don't want to hear it, people come to me because they want change.
They want change. Well, that's beautiful.
This work will change you, right? But people do want change. They just don't know how. So we take your friend who's got the bowel problem, right? My mother was like that. My mother was sick, was a sickly person. And that was actually how she powered herself through the world. She was filled with fear and insecurity and inadequacy. She felt shame about who she was as a person. She didn't think she was good enough. And I was very happy to agree with her and shame her, to tell you the truth. And so she became sick and realized that if she was sick, like that was a way that she could get attention, because she didn't feel like she had enough to offer other people, that they would love her for who she was. And so she had to manipulate people into caring for her. That was her. She became very manipulative, and she would talk about what was wrong with her, because at one time someone gave her attention for that. And that felt good. And she didn't feel like she could get attention for being her authentic self. So she got obsessed. My mother, that was all she would talk about, is her health, right? Because she was filled with fear and inadequacy. And now, did I hang out with my mother all the time? I did not. You know, my mother's dead now a long time, right? But how can we help these people and come to, our job is to grow and understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I ever ask a question, why is this happening? Why did they do that? It's actually my work to answer that question, because it's answerable. And it's almost always that they're afraid. And if I look deeply at any person who's annoying the hell out of me and ask, what are they afraid of? Or imagine them as a 5-year-old child. That's a really powerful one, right? Then we do understand why is Donald Trump the way that he is? Why is this other politician the way? Why does this person act this way? If we sit deeply with that, I have a neighbor who's crazy as a loon. He hates me. I've had restraining orders on him. He's a nut. You get one every, we live in attached houses here, and there's like a house in every block that's like falling down, and the shades are falling, and like the houses are, it's a phenomenon, I think, in any city, that there's a certain demographic, and there's one, he happens to live next to me.
Yeah.
And you know, I've gone through all kinds of things, from having a baseball bat next to my front door, honest to God.
Really?
To, yeah, because he's crazy. He breaks the windshield wipers on my car.
I hate that.
Because he's a nut. He's a nut, right? But what I've come to find out is he had tremendous suffering as a child. He doesn't have a good life. And you know, I represent, I think, everything that he probably wishes he could have in his life, and he hates me for it. And that's just weird. And you know what, I've gone from all different, you know, God bless him.
Yeah.
I just try to God bless, and I don't interact with them. What's the best we can do? I don't know. It's so negative energy release, right? So in my work, very specifically, everything lives in our body. Our mind is filled with stories and narratives, some of which are true, many of which are not. We all have our perspective, and we're very attached to it. This is my story, I'm sticking to it. But the stories are often a lie. They're meant, again, to protect our ego idea of who we are.
Okay.
Usually about other people, not about us, right? So I like to work directly with the body, because the body doesn't lie. The body always tells the truth. So if we have any kind of negativity, we can look at where it lives in the body. And it always does. There's always, we spend a lot of time up here because we don't want to be what's happening, right?
Everything's up here.
Trying to figure out why, right? But that doesn't solve anything. That's an intellectual, interesting idea we can talk about. But what really changes things, when we drop down below our chin, all the information we need is there. And so whether it's an inner critic, whether it's anxiety, depression, any kind of dysfunction that we have, we can look at how we experience that in our body. Is it a voice in my head? Is it a tightness in my throat? Is it a sickness in my stomach, or a pressure on my back? I mean, there's all different, when we can open up to our more intuitive, non-rational ways of knowing, and come out of our little limited intellect that thinks it's supposed to know everything, the poor thing, and it can't know very much. When we move into this more intuitive way of knowing, then we can give these things that generally don't have a form, they're just a feeling, or an idea or a thought, we can give it a form. And once it has a form, then we can work with it in really powerful ways. And generally looking for the deeper need underlying the dysfunction. And then we open up to the universal life force, of which we are all a part. We're all little units of consciousness in a larger consciousness system. There's so much more, like we're all plugged into a bigger grid, whether we're aware of it or not. And we can tap into those higher resonances that are usually the deeper need. Usually the deeper need that's underlying any dysfunction is love or compassion, safety or connection, or a acknowledgement, or really just being present with what is.
Yeah.
When we can feed that to these formations that we have in ourselves, whether it's, a terrible critical voice or an anxiety in our belly, we'll generally have a transformative experience. And often the inner parts of ourself that we've become disconnected from, and we all have all kinds of disconnection, make themselves available, and we can become more whole by doing, and this is where shamanism comes in, is processes that are known and practiced really throughout the world with indigenous people, called soul retrieval, which is aspects of ourselves that left. They're overwhelmed. They don't like what's happening, or they weren't able to be cared for. Or they got scared away. And how do we? And we often blame and shame those things in ourselves. And how do we bring back our own internal wholeness? Parts of our emotional self, parts of our spiritual self, our internal relationship with ourselves. How do we bring that back? Those are the two ways of releasing an energy clearing. I mean, we can get all esoteric about it, and I use a drum and I've done space clearing and all that stuff, but we can really, I think for most people, again, there's this idea that the outside is separate from the inside, and it's not. And any work that needs to be done outside, if we do it inside first, the outside generally.
Yeah, so how do you, how do you convey that to your patients, Renee, like regarding, everything that you're saying stems from a knowing that we are beings of energy, that we're a spiritual form in form, and we're just having this like human experience. But I have to think that probably many, if not all of your patients who are coming to you don't, resonate with that thought process of being spiritual first and then having this human experience. Like, do you have to start with that as a kind of 101 lesson? Say, hey, listen, first let's understand that we are spirit, that everything that you're thinking is going to resonate, and it's going to form a, like how you referenced earlier, dis-ease. That's where it's coming from. It's coming from what, your energy, if you're having a lower vibration and resonating there for too long of a time, because I always wondered about people like yourself who do that kind of practice. Like, do you have to have like a double conversation? Like, first, let's talk about what we are as these spiritual beings, and then from there we can talk. You don't, right?
Or absolutely not. Because the thing is, I gotta tell you, I have my own subjective perspective too, and I could be as full of crap as anybody else. I don't know what's true. I know what I think is true. I know what my experience is, but it's just my experience. So I meet people where they are, because we are, it's my experience that we are all aspects of divinity, that we are all pieces of something that's larger.
I would say we're just individualized expressions of a source. I happen to call that source God. People call it spirit, soul, love, higher consciousness. Exactly.
So the thing is to move out of the philosophical or theoretical and the rational approach to it, and actually just have the experience. That's where the change happens, right? And so what I do with everybody is I start with the easiest connection that is available to all of us, is the connection with the spirit of nature, which we're connected with right now. Right at this moment, gravity is holding us to the earth. We have fluid in some form of water flowing through every cell of our body, and we are breathing in and out every moment, the air, right? So we are connected with the elements right now. We don't need to go to Yosemite, the Hudson Valley to connect with nature.
And a lot of people don't even understand that fact, that you can get in touch with nature just if you realize what you're saying.
It's an experience. You don't have to understand it. When we come into our body and into the present moment, and I do some guided visualization with people to connect with higher consciousness through the spirit of nature. And it's a very high resonance. Again, I lean on the shamanic system as a tool, and it's just a tool. There's tons of tools. God is always trying to get in touch with us, right? Whether it's through religion or through felt experience, or through sexuality, or through food, or through our connections and love with another person, or a child, or a dog, or through the sunshine and the beauty. Like, God is always trying to, there's a zillion portals, but nature's a very easily accessible one. In the shamanic system, there's 3 realms: the upper realm, the lower realm, and the middle realm. And I like the system. I find it really accessible and easy to understand.
Yeah.
That we're basically the middle world here, not like in Judeo-Christianity where the lower world is hell.
Mm-hmm.
In shamanism, this middle world where we are now, that's the hell realm. This is where the suffering is, right? Buddhism will tell you the same, right? This is where the suffering is because of this, right? And this is where the work is, because of the suffering is pushing us, telling us there's a problem. That's what suffering does. Pain shows us there's a problem.
Yeah.
You got to pay attention. Makes us pay attention. Pain makes us pay attention like nothing else, right?
Yeah.
So this middle realm, and we are actually surrounded by higher consciousness. And so it's very easy to access. You don't need to go to school or even sit quiet for 20 minutes, to tell you the truth. We drop into our bodies and open all aspects of ourself. It is aware through these non-rational. We are all spirit. We all have spirituality within us, whether we're aware of it or not. You don't have to call it that. Doesn't matter what the wording is. But when we drop into our body, and there's some very simple, really, it's just opening our active imagination to connect with a beautiful, powerful place in nature. Could be a place you've been before. Could be a place that's something new, and trusting, opening to what comes. And we all have elements that we resonate with. Some people are fire people, some people are water, some people are earth, some people are air, some people like the desert or the mountain or the beach or the meadow. And opening to that, we can felt experience of that connection with nature.
I've always been the beach. My wife and I, because I was raised on the Jersey Shore here, and I always have that like interconnection. It always calls me, the ocean. Always does, always will.
The ocean is incredibly powerful. And when we really open to this idea that all things have consciousness, even things we might consider inanimate, like the ocean or a rock or a tree, when we can open to that, God moves through all things. And that felt experience, I like to say it's like taking a shower. We can talk about taking a shower, the warm water and the soap, but it's only in taking the shower that we get clean.
Yeah.
So on my website, this is the whole purpose of my book, and the guided audio that goes with it is to get people to actually do this work. And so on my website, there's a drop down of inner journeys. People can do these. They're pre-recorded. It's the work that they would do in my office to connect with nature, to connect with a very traditional source of higher power, which is through a spirit animal or a power guide or a power animal, which is a spirit guide in animal form. Connecting with your own higher self, your own authentic self. It's usually a child part of ourself. Connect with ancestors. It's chapter 4. Chapter 5 is dissolving the inner critic. It's work I do on Insight Timer on a regular basis. So I have recorded this guided audio so that people can do these I call them inner journeys, to connect with source and to dissolve and transform their own inner suffering. And with these really ancient practices that are available and easily accessible to everyone. All the talking is just about getting people to do the work.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. We can talk about it all we want. You know what? Talking doesn't change a thing.
Don't do anything.
Understanding doesn't change a thing.
Yeah.
It is the experience that changes.
Yep.
So
I love how Wayne Dyer used to say it too. He used to talk about an experience. He used to use it in the ways that if someone is trying to stop smoking cigarettes, he said, you'll stop smoking cigarettes when you stop putting a cigarette to your lips and not until then, right? It's that experience. The same thing with swimming. You can think about what swimming is, right? You can visualize it, but you have to experience. You have to do it.
Yeah.
But
so that's what's beautiful about the earth plane,
Yeah.
is that in living color, we get to act our way into a different way of being.
Mm.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
living color
Thinking,
too.
thinking, talking, it might get us to know what the actions are, but it is the actions that we take that create our reality.
Yeah, it's the experience. That's wonderful. Speaking of how you touched on your book, you know, for my friends listening, Renee's referring to her book, Allies and Demons, which shortly I'm going to tell you exactly where you can find it, but it's a marvelous read. I'm hoping to get through it myself here. I want to get it from you, Renee, because I'm intrigued by it. But I actually wrote down a caption from it here where you said, when we resolve our underlying emotional and spiritual problems, the inner demons that cause our suffering unravel and dissolve. Connected with spiritual allies and free our inner demons, we can express our authentic self in the world and discover the joy and fulfillment that are our birthright. So beautifully said. Love that. Love that.
Thank you.
You know, but you don't necessarily consider, you know, like the two sides of that equation, allies and demons, right?
Well, we all have inner
Yeah.
our fear, our unresolved suffering, our anger and outrage, our confusion. Those are our inner demons. And we all have allies as well, whether they're internal, our own higher self, our love, our compassion, our understanding.
Well, like recently, I've been big with angels recently, especially, you know, you talk about your mom. My mom passed in 2018, and she has been showing her spirit, her presence with me, Renee, so much, especially since over the last almost year now, I've been going through this cancer journey of mine. And I see her in so many ways. I hear her voice. I see signs. I see feathers. I'm a big buyer of the whole feathers and dimes that, you know, as I'm speaking to you, I'm on my desktop computer here. It's got to be probably about 30 or 40 dimes that every time I find one, I know it's my mom, I scotch tape it to the border of my computer here. Because it's just her way of letting me know, because she knows that that's what I'm thinking, that if I see this, I know that she's with me. So, you know, it helps me. I see orbs, and I see specific orbs, Renee. Like I'll always take a selfie with my wife. We're out somewhere or something like that. And multiple times I've seen orb like right on my throat here, where I have throat cancer. And to find it like right there, so, you know, randomly, you know what I mean? It's like showing up there. And I know that people could like dissuade that and say blah, 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 but I don't, because I fully believe it. And I know it's my mom saying, no, I'm right with you exactly where it is. And we have this. I love that. So like to your point about the allies, right? Can be in many forms.
So much help available. We are like fish swimming in the ocean that don't know what the water is, right? There's so much help available to us, and we feel disconnected. I mean, we live in these bodies, we seem to be separate. You know, it can be very confusing. And that's the work, is to make the connections in whatever way that they come to us. They're always coming to us, being able to open up to be able to see them, like you were able to see them, Danny, right? And so that's a lot of my work, is helping people get connected. I think disconnection is the source of all of our fear, right? And so how do we get connected? How do we plug in? And, you know, I think we're all a unique individual part, like being a plant in a garden. And we all have our work to do here. And being who we really are is how we feel fulfilled and happy in our life. But a lot of us don't think who we are is okay. We think we need to be somebody else.
And that always kind of breaks my heart, Renee. You know, like, especially like if I hear someone put it in such terms like, I don't have a purpose, or I don't know what I'm doing here, or I don't know why I'm here. like it hurts me to hear that, because I know that everyone is a gift and everyone does have a purpose. I just try to do it. I just try to tell them as simply as I can that you have to be receptive to your, whatever you call your higher self, because that's how you're going to find out what that purpose is. If you're receptive to it, you'll get what we know here on earth as intuition. Like you said earlier, it's those intuitive nudges. It's those intuitive feelings that we all get, hopefully on a daily basis, but that so many of us just push aside as happenstance or something like that. And, like another one of my great Dr. Dyer sayings are, there are no accidents in a perfect universe. So when you're feeling something nudging you, Renee, that you can attest to more than anyone, it's there for a reason. You gotta heed that advice. And that's exactly what it is. It's a sign of divinity.
And it's awesome. And that's what you're doing with your show, right? You're bringing that to people. It's really beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing, man. But, everyone has to find it in their own time. And like I said, I've spoken with people who are older than me, and I'm 61 now. And I say there's no time limit to anything like this. If you can just be receptive, it'll all fall into place when it's supposed to. I guess, you know what I mean? That's all we can go off of it.
Well, so the thing is, though, from my experience, when people are suffering, it really makes us open-minded. It makes us open-minded. I mean, it's hard to go outside of our comfort zone. It's hard to go into the unknown and do things different and see ourselves different. It can be very, very frightening.
Yeah.
But we don't have to do it by ourselves. And actually, it is safe. But we need a lot of help to get there. I mean, that's, I've received unbelievable and continue to receive exponential help. And now I've dedicated my life to helping others, right?
Yeah.
And we all do it in our own way, just like you're doing, right?
Yeah. I get asked a lot, why I do this and why I talk and write and podcast and blog and all this fun stuff about something called oneness. And I always say the same thing, Renee. I didn't choose this. I felt compelled. I feel that oneness called me and continues to call me, because getting back to what I just referenced, I've been paying homage to my intuition, to my intuitive side for decades now. And something always steered me towards this. I'm a singer-songwriter by trade, and I was in like rock bands back in the early 80s, and like I'm writing lyrics for these songs, and they all have this common thread of unity and like coming together. And like, Dan, can't we talk about something else? I'm like, no, you're asking me to write lyrics. This is what I'm writing about. So they always worked in the song regardless. But it was just always funny. And then like when I started to grow and find out more, and I was raised a devout Catholic. But by the time I got to my 20s, Renee, like I really started to see the writing on the wall with religion. And I just started to question my own spirituality. And that's what really led me on a path to, I guess, uncover oneness, if you want to say it in that fashion, because the thoughts of like religion weren't resonating with me. It seemed like it was a fear monger. It felt like, how can we get these people to believe just this one way? But yet the other religion, no, it's got to be this way. No, but this one says it's got to be this way. So then there was all the dichotomy, all these people arguing, this is the right way, this is the right way. And then I said, time out here, there has to be something. There has to be a road down the center of this. What's the commonality? So like you said, all of those religions you referenced before, Hinduism, Buddhism, everything, right? They all have that commonality of a unity, of a love. It's just that some of the religions, as far as me, again, you're talking off the cuff as I do, people may not believe what I'm saying, what I'm referencing here, but I believe in that huge difference between religion and spirituality for that purpose, for that they need to get people on board because it's a business. And as long as you keep paying the piper, they're going to keep creating these stories of a place called hell and Satan that you could just burn it, so you're here of free will now. Remember this, you're here of free will, but you have to abide by these 10 commandments. And I'm like, well, that's hypocritical. You can't say that. You can't say free will and then say I have to abide by 10 commandments, because that doesn't make sense to me. Again, my thoughts, but a lot of people I know think along those lines as well too. And it's like, all right, if it's free will, it's free will. It's not someone's free will. It's free will. And so it's stuff like that. When I started to delve into that in my 20s, that I really just started to drift away. I just, focused more on the spirituality.
It's an interesting thing because I became a Catholic in 2000 as an adult when I was 35 years old. And I don't go to mass, but I go to church because I was called there by the divine feminine, because Mary is the only place that you can find the divine feminine actually presented and exalted anywhere in any religion outside of Hinduism. Interesting, right? So I'm a mystical Catholic. I have actually much more for Mary than I do for Jesus. And the thing so I want to introduce this idea before we close. So there's a life-changing perspective called spiral dynamics. And it was actually discovered by this social anthropologist called Claire Graves, who was doing a massive social research project at a big university. And he discovered, after interviewing like 250,000 people, that there were these worldviews that people held. And he realized it was actually almost like a developmental system of people. It had nothing to do with intelligence. It had nothing to do with religion or even political leaning, although political leaning falls into it. It's interesting. It was a worldview that different people, and so there's, and it follows, interestingly, people's human development, like child development. And so there are places, so when a child first develops, they're just in survival mode, right? It's just about food and water, right? Whatever, taking, basic human instincts.
Yeah.
And so that's the baseline of spiral dynamics. That's the first, they call it a meme. It's the first color. Okay. And then the next one is tribal or magic mythic. So it's kind of the idea, and we can look at children, and they're completely dependent on their parents and what's happening in the system. And just like when we developed as humans, tribally, the tribe survival depended on everyone else, right? There was no individuation, because individuals, there might have been a few, but generally you survived.
It was it was the community, right? Yeah, the guy.
And whatever was happening in the world was it was very supernatural. If an earthquake happened, we must have made the gods mad. Like that was the worldview. They knew there was more going on, but it was a limited understanding. And then the limitations of each stage of development call us to grow, just like with children, right? So children, after they dependent on their parents, then they start to say no. They have their own desires, right? So same thing in the tribal cultures. Then they people wanted to be more individual, and so they somebody was like, hey, I'm not going to do whatever the tribe wants. That doesn't serve me. And so they went out and started their own tribe, and then they became a tribal leader, and then they became like this power dynamics with the person in charge, like dictatorships, right? Yeah. That's a political structure that exists in a lot of, particularly third world countries, as they're developing out. It's a natural progression out of tribalism, actually, is dictatorship. And then there's limits to dictatorship. So then it's like, well, if you're in a dictatorship, a lot of people don't get their needs met. So we need something that takes care of everyone. And then like democracy is born, and unions are born, and there's ideas, there's rules. Like, let's make rules so that people can be in charge, but other people, and that's it. Actually, that's spiral dynamics things, colors, and that's blue, right? The one, like the dictatorship one, the tribal leadership one, that's red, right? And so there's like this natural evolution happening, but there's limitations. So fundamentalism, which is what a lot of religions are, has right and wrong. This is good, this is bad. and children go through that too. Children will go through a very rule following. They want to know what's right,
Sure.
what's wrong. Makes things very simple, black and white, right? This is good, this is bad, boom. In a lot of religions, that's the worldview that they're operating on, good and bad. But as we continue to evolve, and like we just talked about, then there's this idea of free will. Like that's a thing, and there's no room for free will in that structure of blue, right? And so we move into the next phase on spiral dynamics. It's orange, which is individuation, which is really what's happening a lot in our culture right now. It's funny that Donald Trump is orange, and he's very orange. It's about personal gain. It's about corporate. It's about business. It's about what can I do as an individual? How successful can I be? And kind of screw everyone else. But and then what grows out of that, the limitations of that, which you were pointing to, is we start to see, oh, well, if I just take care of myself, then the whales are dying and the water is dirty and it's getting hot everywhere.
Yeah.
So we got to start caring for everyone else again. That's green. It's funny that that's green on there because it's green like the Green Party and Greenpeace. And we start to think again about everyone else. How can we include people? What about trans rights? What about gay rights? What about elder rights? What about, we're going to give everybody a voice. And so that's kind of weird. So, and then it goes on to yellow and turquoise and these developmental worldviews. And you can look at anything through that spiral, and every level on that spiral is important. It serves the whole, it makes sense, just like child development, just like political development. You can understand why trying to bring democracy to Afghanistan that's actually still tribal doesn't work. They got to go through each means. They actually need the Taliban. It's unfortunate that it had to be the Taliban, but they need rule structure.
Yeah.
Taliban's one of the, anyway, that's kind of controversial, but that's my belief. And we can look at religion that way. We can look at politics that way, and it becomes understandable. So if we look at Catholicism through the lens of the spiral, we can find people on any color on that spiral in the billion people that are in the Catholic Church. Now, a lot of them are in that fundamentalist place, but there's a lot that aren't. The Catholic Church is huge. There's people that get abortions and use birth control, and there's gay Catholics, and there's all kinds of that don't follow the rule and still go to church, right? And there's people like me who kind of fuck all those rules, and I just go when nobody's there and talk to Mary. And I consider myself a Catholic.
Yeah.
Interesting. Although I say Father, Mother, Holy Spirit, because I think they left the woman.
Oh, I love that.
So, but they didn't leave her out because she's up there and she's over here and she's she's everywhere. They're always trying to. So, anyway, I love to talk about spiral dynamics anytime I can because it's changed. What it's done for me is like that question: why do they do that, or how can they think that? When I look and understand people's worldview, that answers the question. Oh, that's where they're at. That's their worldview. And when you look at it, then it's understandable why the coal miners, want to keep coal going, or why the corporate executives who are into their individuation aren't caring about the seals that are dying because of global warming. And then the people that are green, who do care about the seals, they stand on the shoulders of orange and blue. Anyway, I have a podcast number 25, my own podcast, Spiritual Psychology, about spiral dynamics. It's actually my most popular episode because I want to teach it in schools. I want people to know about it because what it does is it takes us again to this place of more compassion and understanding that wherever people are at is valid. Wherever people are at, it's understandable. And when we can understand them and validate them, then they actually have the opportunity to grow. They don't have to defend themselves.
You're right.
That's
beautiful.
That's my rant about spiral dynamics.
That's fine, my dear. But listen, like before I let you go here, I always like to ask my guests prior to us signing off one specific question. I didn't give you a heads up on this because I don't like to.
Fine.
So I'm going to ask you just a question. I don't care, Renee, 1 word, 2 words, 100 words, but everyone here has their own unique spin on it, and it's important to me. And as soon as you hear the question, you'll know why. Are you ready?
Sure.
Question is this: why oneness?
Because it's what's true.
Right? Wonderful. Wonderful. Because it's the truth. I love it. I love it. I love it. Everyone has had a different answer, and that's right, right to the point, because it's true, So Renee, tell my friends, because I'm going to be following this up. It's going to be listed all on the description of this podcast, and it's going to be flying across here on our YouTube version coming up. But tell them briefly, where is the best way to stay in contact with all things spiritual psychology and all things Renee McKenna? So where can my friends reach you?
The easiest place to find me is on my podcast, Spiritual Psychology. It's on every platform. And it's spelled Psikolody, because it's more on the psi end of the ecology. Anyway.
Yes.
And my website, reneemckenna.com, has links to my website, my Instagram, starting my own YouTube channel. I have a lot of free offerings, a free download of the first copies of my book. You can get free downloads of the inner journeys that go with my book. You can get a link to my book, and there's a workbook that goes with it. I do lots of free offerings on Insight Timer as well. Renee McKenna, you can search me, and I come up all over.
And what about that cool artwork that I saw, man? You're so talented.
Thank you so much. So you can look up Renee McKenna art, and it will come up on Squarespace. And here we are.
Yeah, my friend, she's got really so much going on. But so Renee, again, I can't thank you enough, my dear friend. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. I love everything that you stand for. You enlightened me tonight in leaps and bounds, and I can't thank you enough for that. I love your approach to all things spirituality. But for my friends out there listening, thank you again to listening to this show that I call That Oneness Guy, and that is me. I appreciate you turning in and tuning in, as I like to say, as I continue to share my message of oneness and the spiritual gifts that guests like Renee are so kind to share. This has been episode number 50. Yay! An interview with therapist and shamanic healer. Yeah, Renee McKenna. So until next time, my dear friends, my name is Danny Rongo. I am That Oneness Guy. Please look forward to my next show. And as always, I send you peace, love, light, and continued oneness. Namaste.
Thanks, Danny.
The words that will comfort me, I am.
I thank you again for listening to That Oneness Guy podcast. Please take a moment to subscribe to this feed wherever you may be listening to or watching this podcast. And please look me up and follow me on social media. You can find That Oneness Guy on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Just search for That Oneness Guy. And finally, to stay in touch with all things oneness, my books, and performances, please visit my websites, thatonenessguy.com and dannyrongo.com. In closing, remember this: oneness is not a religion. You can call it a spirituality, but it is more than that. It is a truth and a knowing. The knowing that we emanate from one source. Just like branches on any one tree, we are individualized expressions of that source. This is the truth of our race, the human race.
I am one of many who have come to sing.